Questions? So in-band management allows you to manage the radio over the same cable as your data. Okay? Typically this comes into play on an all-outdoor radio where you only want to run one cable up. Okay? We suggest that you use a VLAN. If you're using an old Apex, you've got to use a VLAN. If you're using an old Apex Plus, you've got to use a VLAN. If you're using a new one that's shipped in the last 6 months, then you don't have to use a VLAN. If you're using a Giga Plus, you don't have to use a VLAN, but I suggest you do. Why do I suggest you use a dedicated management VLAN? Because you can assign a quality of service to that VLAN. If you don't use a dedicated management VLAN, and you don't have your switch assigned to give you some high priority, then your management traffic is lumped in with everything else, including your customers' Netflix data. And when you've got an actual problem on your network and you need to be able to manage the radio, you won't be able to manage it. Okay? That's why I like out-of-band, because you can do whatever you need to do with quality service on your switch. Or I like IBM with the VLAN because you've got a little more control over that. Give your management VLAN the highest quality of service, because it should be hardly any traffic. Okay? So give it that priority 7. Okay. The interface for the in-band management should be on a separate subnet than the out-of-band. Everybody know what a subnet is? Somebody asked me yesterday. Let's just keep it simple and assume you're using standard class ABCs, okay? 10.14.1. whatever, that's a /8, is on the same subnet as a 10.1.1.1. Okay, that won't work. If I switch those both to be /24s, like it was a class C, even though it's not, then they'd be different subnets. If I use a classic class C example, 192.168.100.whatever is a network, and then 192.168.1.whatever is another network. Those would be valid. Okay? They cannot be in the same subnet. If you don't know subnetting, ask me if the 2 addresses you want to use are valid. I do need to know the subnet mask to tell you the answer to that question. IBM will only work on one interface, so you pick which interface you want to use. You only get one default gateway. Why do you only get one default gateway?
You have one internet connection.
It's valid. Okay. You can use in-band management independent of the out-of-band. Like I showed you this morning, you could out-of-band into one radio, and then through the in-band you could log into the other radio. I think John mentioned that they use that sometimes to find out if there's a problem with the switch on the far side. Okay. Straddling 24 is a little bit different. We do default it to IBM on and an untagged VLAN because we assume that the majority of the customers using that are only running one cable and are used to an unlicensed radio that works that way. On the straddling 24, if you make a change to the management port or turn IBM on or turn IBM off, the management stays on the port you're on currently. Okay? So if you turn IBM off, your data port is going to move to the fiber port because we want you to still be able to manage the radio. You could then refresh the page and turn the management back to the other port if you wanted to. But by default, we're going to keep the management on the interface you're on. Okay. Here's a block diagram of a Apex Plus ONU. This is like an IDU. Okay. Sometimes I thought maybe this would help some people understand the way this in-band management and out-of-band work. So here's the CPU. This is where we control everything. This is where you talk to when you type a command or you pull up the web interface. It has 2 interfaces on it. Much like my laptop has 2 interfaces on it. It's got one going to this hardwired Ethernet, and it's got one wireless going to the internet right now. There. So call this your wired connection and call that your wireless connection. Okay? If I pulled out another little Thunderbolt to Ethernet adapter, I'd have 3 Ethernets. Okay? So this is your out of band. It goes directly into the CPU, and that's the only place it goes. you'll notice there's no way for that out of band to get out here to the modem. Doesn't work. CPU also has a port that goes into the Ethernet switch. Okay? That Ethernet switch, this is an Apex Plus, has two interfaces that go out. One of them is the copper interface, one of them is the SFP. Okay? You can set up the IBM to work where it can take the traffic in here and can come here. Much like my laptop right now, this address is 192.168.100 and happens to be getting me out to the internet. And this route is 172.16.1 dot, I don't know, 100 or something. Okay? Any questions on IBM? Speak now or forever hold your peace. This is what it looks like on a GigaPlus IDU. Looks almost the same, except that the switch has 4 ports. Here's how you configure it. IBM or IP config gateway. Okay. Just use the web interface, it's easier. Last chance. Yes.
Hey Scott, if you're running fiber up to the ODU, so is the fiber handling both IBM and out of band and in band?
If you only want to run the one cable, and you're going to go to the fiber port,
Yep.
then you're doing in-band management only. And the out-of-band management effectively is dead. I mean, it's always there. You cannot turn it off. But effectively, it's not going anywhere. You have nothing plugged into the port. So my suggestion is to leave the out-of-band at the default, 192.168.100 on every radio. That way, if that radio ever comes down off the tower, you don't have to wonder about it. You can just plug in and go. You know what the interface is. Set up the in-band management to whatever IP address you want it to be, as long as it's not 192.168.100 dot something. You won't have any problems. Set your IP config gateway to match your IBM. Okay? Away you go.
Can you just do that to avoid IP conflicts?
Yeah, if both of them, I mean, it will technically work if they're both in the same subnet, but you have no control over which way it's going to go. The radio's going to decide, am I going to send it out this interface or am I going to send it out this interface? And if I send it out the out of band, it's not going anywhere. So that's why I just tell you, just use a different subnet.
But if there were different IPs on the same subnet?
I wouldn't know which one to use. If I have 2 connections to the same subnet, my computer can just decide whichever one it wants to use. There's a priority to it. You don't have a way to set the priority in the radio. So the only way that you can do it is make sure they're different subnets. On my Mac here, and I mean same thing in your PC, you set a priority. I tell it use the wired interface first, or use the wireless interface first. That one has the priority, even if they're on the same subnet. But you don't have the way to do that. So the way you do it is make sure they're different subnets. Good question. Anyone else?
And you thought I was sleeping.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Gone. Okay, and both radios are receiving it. Okay, typically this is one antenna on a combiner like this. Allows the standby unit to take over in the event of a hardware failure. Okay, does not protect you against any kind of frequency interference or any of that stuff. 2+0 would. You can do the data ports on or off. What did I tell you guys yesterday? Too much to take in. Huh?
We get duplicate data.
Yes, if you have the ports on, you're going to get duplicate data. So make your life simple. Just forget that option was ever there. And you want failover on with ports off if you're using failover. Okay? You could, if you're cheap, you can power both units from one power supply. You know, like here, I could have the two of them sitting side by side and just use one power supply. But if you're going to the expense of 1 + 1 on standby, 2 power supplies is probably a better idea. Alright, so failover can work if you do a manual switchover for like a firmware upgrade, or if you got to do service on one, you can manually switch it to the other. It will protect against an ODU cable disconnect. It will protect against receive loss, meaning if the transmitter failed on the other side or something like that. Power supply failure, if you have 2 power supplies, or one radio being rebooted. Alright, here's the commands you need to know to do it. Failover to enable it. Don't change the guard time. Sync happens automatically. Sync status will tell you if they're synced. U-type will also tell you if they're synced. Remember what you want to do with the U-type. You want to make sure that active shows active before you turn on failover on the standby. Then instead of sync it, U-type switch to manually do it. I know I went over that quickly. Complain to me later. No, stop me if you want to know more. Okay, remember this is what I told you before. I just told you again. Okay, if you need to do the software upgrade on a 1 + 1, this is the suggested way of doing it. Upgrade the software on the standby, fail over to the standby, make sure it's working, then you can upgrade the active, and then you can fail back if needed. If you're going to do it, feel free to ask me before you do it, and we'll make sure you've got the right process. Rapid port shutdown. Turns the ports off if the link goes down, brings the ports back on when the link comes back. If you're running IBM, what does that mean? You have no management. Thank you. Alright, what's different if I activated RPS here? They go off, but they do not come back. Thank you. Okay, we already showed you how to do thresholds. Troubleshooting. Look at that. Couldn't be any more on time. 2 p.m., 2:01. Alright, so we got